I thought we would read a I thought we would look through a selection of verses from the Gita. I think there's certain basic things that a religion needs to teach. Certain basic ideas that you'll find conveyed in almost any religion. One of them would be a conception of self. Who are you? Also, I think there's roughly two ideas about a conception of self. If I want to be thorough, I think there's two basic worldviews. There's an atheistic worldview and a theistic worldview. And so, if you think that consciousness is nothing but a derivative quality of chemicals interacting with each other due to the fundamental forces of physics, then you're an atheist. You're a materialist. You may have rituals. You may celebrate birthdays. You may wear a particular outfit, like firemen wear a particular outfit, or people who belong to a bowling club wear similar shirts and shoes. But irrespective of the cultural aspects of your group or your ideology, if it's based on the idea that all that exists is quanta governed by fundamental forces of physics, you are an atheist, a physicalist, a materialist, etc., etc. On the other side of the equation, you have spiritualists. And the word spiritual is, I don't think it's etymologically correct. Spiritual is where you get the word respiration from. It means you breathe. But spiritual means, nowadays, in the English language, that there is something more to reality than just dead matter interacting according to physical laws. Therefore, consciousness, for a spiritualist, for almost all spiritualists, is a special phenomenon. It's different. It's distinct from matter. There's life and there's matter, and those are two different things. And so a basic definition of spirituality or theism or anti-materialism, just depending on how you want to describe it, is this idea that there's more to reality than just matter interacting with itself according to physical laws. Do you guys follow that? Okay. Now, if everything is material, then anything we see that appears to not be material is an illusion. If everything's material, then whatever appears to be different than matter, like consciousness, is ultimately an illusion that can be broken down to more primitive, fundamental material states. Therefore, even if consciousness is an emergent phenomena of matter, if you ultimately break down consciousness, it will break back down into electrochemical synapses going off in the brain, and there will be no ghost in the machine, so to speak. There will be nothing beyond those chemical states. So, for the atheist, physicalist / materialist, things which appear to be distinct from matter or appear to be fundamentally different from matter, those things are only different from matter in some delusional way, illusory way. But if you really get a big enough microscope out and you look at something through a big enough microscope, you'll find that nothing exists but matter. I think everything I've said in that regard is fairly standard if you have a basic understanding of theism and atheism and how it works. What I think is less known is that if you are a theist, then your starting place is spirit as an eternal principle of reality. And therefore, when you break down matter, it ultimately turns back into spirit. And if you look at matter through a close enough philosophical microscope, you're able to understand that ultimately matter is an illusion superimposed upon a spiritual reality. So you have your starting point, either matter or spirit, consciousness we can say. I'm going to go with consciousness. Matter or consciousness. That's my starting point. Now reality consists of both consciousness as well as matter, or life as well as matter. So if my starting point is matter, and I look at a world filled with life and matter, I have to find a way to get rid of life by describing it as an emergent phenomenon that occurs sometimes in matter, but that's fundamentally non-different than matter. If my starting point is consciousness, and I look in the world and I see matter and consciousness, I then have to figure out a way to nullify or break down matter into its more primitive conscious state. Did you follow that? There is an exception to this, which would be a true dualism, where truly there was matter and spirit that existed fundamentally from beyond time. They had absolutely different features, and one was not the source of the other. I don't want to deal with that potentiality because I want to primarily discuss theistic traditions, and at least the majority of theistic traditions that we'll discuss, they have a problem in trying to figure out how the material world came from a spiritual deity. It's a problem. That one way around that problem is to posit a pure dualism, that truly these two fundamental things exist. In reality, of course, that's a less elegant explanation than being able to describe one thing. If you have two rules that are required to describe something, it's better if you can describe it according to one rule. And so there's always this idea of trying to find the principle behind the apparently two rules so that one of them is seen as intermediate and one of them is seen, or even different than the two rules, there's some background rule which then gives rise. And the simpler and the more complete an explanation can be, and the more singular an explanation can be, through Occam's razor you come to a better explanation. Because you don't have to posit two things as fundamental, you can just deposit one, and that one includes the other. You with me? So I don't want to get into attempting to critique a pure dualism. We won't do that. But what I do want to point out is that if you have a world, let's say, that was created by the devil, and that's a world for about 5 billion people. About 5 billion people in the world believe in 5 billion people on Earth, 2/3 of the world's population, the Christian and the Muslim population of the world, 99% of them. So around 5 billion people. There's 1.5 to 2 billion Muslims and about 3+ billion Christians. So you're looking at around 5 billion people, roughly 2/3 of the world's population. And they have this idea that the world of mammon is fundamentally antithetical and against divinity. But yet God somehow created the world. And therefore there had to be some other thing that was going on, which would be a devil figure that was involved in the corruption of the world and the fundamental wrongness of the world and the inadequacies of the world. But the problem becomes then that who created the devil? God did. And so you're left with this, even if you look at mainstream spirituality, you're left with different ideas and stories and explanations for how bad things came from an all-good, all-powerful being. An all-good being wouldn't want to create bad things. An all-powerful being wouldn't have to allow for bad things to exist. So an all-good and all-powerful being would seem to nullify the existence of bad in this world And now to try to figure that out, now a lot of times we say it's us. And that explains mortal evil. But then you're left with natural evil, earthquakes and congenital heart defects and things which weren't caused by one person hurting another. And then you have to explain where those things came from. We do that through karma. But again, our own tradition is attempting to explain apparent bad things in the world so that we can figure out where they came from. And they came from us, and they didn't come from the ultimate source. And that's a way of protecting God from being responsible for the bad in the world, because we got a starting place which is all good, but we got a functional world which isn't all good, and now we have to explain how we got from point A to point B. Just like you have the hard problem of consciousness, which is something that it's like to be you. The experience of the conscious, basic experience of a world. Chemicals don't have any need for being conscious. But somehow or other we have this thing where we have a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week voiceover in our heads, filled with color and sight and sound, thoughts, ideas, feelings, sensations. And it's unique to us. No one else can experience exactly what we experience in the exact way we can. It's analogous, but there's no way for us to transfer our consciousness and our conscious experience to somebody else. We can write about it. They can say, yeah, I've experienced something similar, but you don't quite know for sure, because the very nature of consciousness is it's only subjectively available, and therefore it can't be looked at objectively. You can only look at the symptoms of consciousness. And consciousness represents this basic feature of the world which is always subjective and always experienced in the first person. And therefore any attempt to study it from a third-party perspective, objectively, what science is really good at, loses it, because the very thing you're studying is always experienced subjectively. Did you guys follow that? So, the physicalist, the atheist, the materialist, has this problem of consciousness. And the theist has this problem of matter or suffering or evil, depending on your tradition, or ignorance, depending on your tradition. Because you've got your starting place, which is your kind of first thing, your premise. And you're allowed to have a premise. This is my starting point, and I'm going to work forward from here. There's no way to do it without that. Even the idea of, well, I'll just look around the world and see what's going on, is based on the premise that my senses accurately perceive the world. And my senses will lead me to truth. And my mind is capable, and the world is fundamentally logical. And therefore my logical mind is capable of perceiving fundamental reality. So even if you just take I woke up in this world, I'm just going to see what I can see, there's a premise, a philosophical premise, that my senses correctly perceive reality, that my mind can correctly understand reality. That the world makes sense. If I see something which is true over here, it's going to be true over here, and there's a logos or a logic to the world. There's always a premise. There's always some idea you have about the nature of things that you use as a starting point to do your philosophizing or exploring of the world. So the theist has a problem. And the theist's problem, the spiritualist problem, is that there's bad stuff in the world. And that's, in a big way, theology, spiritual philosophy, is an attempt to explain the somewhat pernicious and all-pervasive problem of matter, of death, of suffering, of pain, of evil. And so if you look at things we say, we'll say things like, God created us with the ability to love. But love requires freedom. Therefore, God gave us freedom, which means God's no longer omnipotent because he gave away some of his power by allowing us to make our own free decisions. Then with that power, we chose bad things, and that's where bad stuff comes from. And when you look at natural problems, those natural problems are actually the result of collective karma. What just happened there philosophically was we said God's not all powerful. And therefore we are powerful in the sense that we can cause bad things to happen. But that power we were given was a gift from the divine. It allowed for love to exist. And then we would argue that a world with the possibility of love, which means we have to have freedom because love has to be chosen freely, is better than a world without the possibility of evil. A world with the possibility of love is better than a world without the possibility of evil. A neutered, robotic world without the possibility of evil. And we make that argument. And therefore we're really focusing on God's goodness. We're letting go a little bit of God's power in order to explain the problems that we see in the world. And in this way, come up with a way to account for our hard problem of suffering. So the atheist has the hard problem of consciousness they have to contend with. The insuperable problem of consciousness. Because consciousness really just defies chemical states and has features of it that you never see in the chemical world. And has features of it which defy emergent philosophy. The idea that something gives rise to something which is more complicated, because that thing can be predicted from the thing that gave rise to it, and it's also ultimately reducible, whereas consciousness is not. Do you guys follow this? I'm making sense. I'm just talking a little fast. But I'm listening to myself talk, and I'm making sense. The spiritualist has their hard problem, which is the hard problem of suffering. And so theology attempts to solve those types of things. So one way is to posit the devil. The problem with positing a devil is where the devil comes from. Oh, it came from God. Okay, well then why did God make the devil? Then you jump back to the free will argument. Well, you might as well just said we have free will, and you could have gotten away with not needing to describe this sort of extra like sixth invisible finger you have in the form of the devil. If you're going to go that route of talking about free will, then why not just talk about free will for all living beings? Why make us out to be non-free and the devil's the only free person and God created one free person and that's the source of all bad stuff? And it's actually a kind of an inelegant way of describing the world. Another way is to own the material world and see the material world as being ultimately spiritual. The world isn't truly evil. It's not truly bad. There's goodness in all things. And the evilness or suffering or defect that you perceive is your immature frame of mind, and you're looking at the phenomena of the world incorrectly. Like a cup is half full, cup is half empty kind of thing. And so our theology, rather than positing true evil or a devil that's truly evil, our way of describing the inadequacies of the world is to describe that ultimately they come from divinity. But because of your freedom, you chose to see them as severed from divinity. Your vision of things as being separate from the divine is illusory. And the therapeutic process of seeing God everywhere at all times and living as a soul is to learn to view material states as being remote and covered spiritual states. And what appears to be material is actually covered spirituality. Let's read a few verses. Rasaham apsu kaunteya. Rasaham. I am the taste, apsu, in water. I am the taste of water. Prabhashmi, shasi, surayoho. I am the light. Prabhashmi, I am the light. Shashi, suryaho. I am the light of the sun and the moon. I am the light of the sun and the moon. A lot of times we demote the moon and its necessity. But if you live in a place without light pollution, full moon nights are this like magical occurrence where all of a sudden you can see everything at night. And then a dark moon night is this really bad occurrence where everything is blindingly dark at night. Shashi. Shasha means rabbit. Shashi means that thing which has a rabbit. Thing which is, and so Shashi, Shashank means rabbit mark. Shashi means that which has a rabbit, because you look up at the moon and you can see a rabbit in the moon. You know, we see the man in the moon. That's a cultural thing in the Western world. Indian people for all time have been looking up at the moon and they see a rabbit in the moon. You see, it's like one ear and another ear. It's really, once I say it, you'll go up, you'll look at the moon and go, oh, there's a rabbit in the moon. So, Shashi Suryaho. Suryaho. Shashi Suryaho. Of the sun and the moon. Pranava Sarva Vedeshu. I am Pranav. I am Omkar in all the Vedas. Shabdake. I am sound in space, because the air carries sound. Parusham Nrishu. In people, I am power. I'm the power of mankind. I'm the light of the sun and the moon. I'm the taste of water. I'm sound carried through the air. I'm Om in all the Vedas. Punyagandha Pritivyam. I am the purified smell of the earth. You know how clean soil has a particular smell to it, like a baby's head has a particular smell to it? I'm that smell. Tejas, Teja Chasmi, Vibhava Sal. I am the flame, the power. I'm the power and fire, the heat and fire. I'm the heat of fire, the light of the sun and moon, the ability of man, Omkar in the Vedas, the sound in the ether, the taste of water, the smell of the earth. Jivanam Sarvabhutishu, the life of all beings. Tapas Chasmi Tapasvishu, and I am the austerities of the ascetics. Krishna is describing himself as almost like a scala naturae, the natural order of things, going back to Aristotle and Pseudo-Dionysus and the great chain of beings, this idea that God is the best of everything you look at. And so when you look, there's noble trees. Noble trees give fruits. And so amongst trees, the noble trees are the best. Noble metals, gold. And so bad metals are like lead that have no particular value, but noble metals like gold. So God is gold. God is a fruit tree. God is the shark amongst the fish. He's Everest amongst the mountains. That, whatever thing within a category most exemplifies that category and has these incredible features of power, strength, or beauty, then God is represented by that thing. This isn't an old idea in philosophy of categorizing the world and seeing divinity within all. Seeing divinity within the world is the best of all things. Buddhi Buddhi Matam Asmi. I'm the intelligence of the intelligent. Tejas Tejas Vinamaham. I am the power of the powerful. Bija Mam Sarvabhutishu. I am the seed or the consciousness or the essential feature of all life. So, try to, vidhi, understand, sanatanam bija. I am the eternal seed of all life and the source of all life. So, what you've got here is this is a theology. It's an attempt to explain the world as being connected to the divine to solve the problem of starting with the divine, looking at a world which has both spirit and matter, and trying to figure out how you get matter or the world from the divine, because all traditions have to explain some certain things. A theory of self, a theory of the world, and a theory of divinity. Now, in terms of a theory of self, there's two basic theories. One is that you're fundamentally broken, and the other one is you're fundamentally good. 5 billion people in the world believe you're fundamentally broken. 99% of 5 billion people in the world believe the self is fundamentally broken. Adam and Eve messed up. You inherited their mess up. You're broken. And Jesus or some Christ-like figure has to come along to vicariously help you get to where you could never go on your own. It's a very powerful worldview. Super disempowering, really unhealthy. Should result in people going to therapy. It's a really bad conception of self. I'm bad. I'm evil. My parents were bad. They made me. I'm bad. I can never be good. I need to, follow some Christ-like figure in order to become good. On my own, I'm never good. It's a very disempowered, unhealthy worldview. If you walked in to a psychologist's office and you said, I think I'm fundamentally broken, and there's nothing good in me, and I'll never be good, and I have to align myself sycophantically, or I have to align myself codependently with some person who is good, and then I'll become good. There's like 5 years of therapy. They're gonna be okay. We got some work to do. Let's get to this. Why do you think that there's something wrong with you? Because I'm a Christian or a Muslim. That's why I think there's something wrong with me. It's in my holy book. That's one worldview. It's not the only one. There's also the worldview that the soul is fundamentally good and only covered by illusion. You can wash off that cover. That's another worldview. So there's a theory of self. Are you fundamentally broken? Are you fundamentally good? And of course, if you're fundamentally broken, why wouldn't all good God, all powerful God, have created you to be fundamentally broken? Certainly, just think about it. Could God have created us to be fundamentally good, but given us free will? But no matter what we did with that free will, we'd never become truly bad? Sure. Could God have always left the door to hell open in case you wanted to come out? Sure, he could have. Wouldn't all good deity have done that? Yeah. So if your tradition says that wasn't done, you have a problem, because it starts to promote a dystheistic conception of divinity, an evil conception of divinity. So you got to work this kind of stuff out. So you see here in the pages of the Gita that we're reading an attempt to work this out. And it might seem like this is the obvious theological way to work it out, but it's not. It's in the grand scheme of things, it's a little bit of an unusual worldview. It's a worldview that ultimately matter is connected to God. If you say matter is unconnected to God, it seems like a win. Because now all the bad stuff that's going on in the world has nothing to do with divinity. But if you posit that the entire creation came from divinity, then it's like a thin victory. Ultimately, you have to go back and figure out why wouldn't all good God have created an all bad world. So it's not really a victory. It kind of gets you a cheap, little bit of like a small reprise, but you ultimately have to go back and think, why is the world an evil world? How does that come from a good deity? And the simple answer is it wouldn't. So you got to go back and do it all again. And so you see this worldview. It's like Krishna's not running from the world. He's claiming the world. Now that doesn't get us out of trouble. Now people go, well, then what about all the bad stuff in the world? And you got to think through it. Listen to this one, the next one. Balam balavatam chaham. I am the strength of the strong. Do bad things happen? Do strong people take advantage of weak people? Yeah, it's the law of the jungle. Strong people take advantage of weak people. In essence, civilization is an attempt to get out of the natural law, which is the law of the jungle, and get to a more civilized law. This is social contract theory. Mankind moves from a natural state of chaos where might equals right into a civilized state where we cede some of our rights for having protection of our other rights. So, just like when you buy a piece of land, you don't actually own like the mineral rights to whatever is like deep underneath that land. It used to be once you owned land, you owned like kind of as far down as you could dig. That's not the case anymore. When you get down far enough, that belongs to the city. I don't know why I just said that. I was trying to make some point, but I totally lost myself on that. Social contract theory is the idea that if you have to pay taxes and you aren't allowed to commit crimes and you aren't allowed to take things from people, well, what do you get for that? You get roads and schools, and you get the protection of your other rights and your life and liberty, and you have to give up some of your rights, usually in the form of taxes, and following the rules of the land as opposed to just doing whatever you want to do. And so we give up. Civilization is the giving up of your freedom so that people who are weaker are not taken advantage of by people who are stronger. If you're the strongest person and you've got the strongest army, you don't need laws. You are the law. Your strong army is the law. You do whatever you want to do, and that just became right. Civilization is you sit down and decide what's fair, and then you get the biggest army around. You pass laws that no one else can have as big of an army as you. And then you enforce that rule of law on society, whether they want to do it or not. Like if you're born in the U.S., you're obliged to follow our rules, whether you accept them or not. So, balam balavatamaham. I'm the strength of the strong. Strength is not always a good thing. Do you follow this? So Krishna says, kama raga vivarjitam. I'm the strength of the strong, freed from desire and attachment. So it's pure strength. Just like Krishna's punya ganda. He's the pure smell of the earth. So he's strength, but not just any strength. Chaotic, demonic, self-serving strength, which is used to exploit others. No, Krishna says I'm strength, but I'm strength which is devoid of personal desire or attachment. It's like the essence of strength, as opposed to the adulterated version of strength you find in this world that exploits people. And then, but now if you say, I'm strength of the strong, but devoid of attachment and devoid of desire, and you're trying to get out of the problem of trying to say that God's responsible for the exploitation in the world, right? Then, well, what about desire? Where does desire come from? If I say, nothing's going on back there, Hector, nothing you need to worry about. If I say, God is the source of all strength, and you say, but evil is done with strength, and I say, no. God is the source of all good strength, strength devoid of desire and passion. Then your next rebuttal can be, well, does that passion and desire come from God? Because that would also be something bad coming from something good. Do you follow this? I'm the source of strength. Oh, then you're bad, because bad things come from strength. No. I'm the source of good strength. Without those bad things. What are those bad things? Desire. Well, then where does the desire come from? Are you the source of desire? Do you see the doubt? Kamosmi, I am desire. Dharma avirudha bhuteshu. I'm the desire of beings that is in accordance with Dharma. Did you follow that? So Krishna is like trying to sort through the world and troubleshoot the things you would normally see as features of the world which made it incompatible with coming from an all-good deity. And he's trying to paint a picture of the world where you start to look at the world and you're looking at the essence of all things. For instance, if you see a knife is a weapon, but it's also a tool. A knife can heal in the hands of a surgeon. It can kill in the hands of a thief. but the knife itself is neutral. How about something like opium? Opium is a source of terrible stuff all over the world. But there are cases where somebody needs a narcotic. For instance, if somebody's going through surgery, or somebody's in incredible pain, has to have their leg amputated or some such thing, then a narcotic, a medicine, is very useful. And we don't think of it as being an illicit or an illegal drug. In fact, the government makes heroin. I don't know what it's called. I think it's OxyContin is a medical grade, pharmaceutical grade. And there are legitimate necessities for that drug. And therefore the government makes it. Because it actually has some value. On the street and in the hands of addicts and stuff like that, it becomes very bad. But that medicine itself is not evil. It can be used in a good or an evil way. And so what Krishna is doing here is he's claiming the whole material world. He's owning it. He's not trying to distance himself from it. He's owning it. And you see him troubleshooting it. I'm the strength of the strong. I know you see strength being used in a bad way, but I'm good strength. Strength devoid of desire. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, where does desire come from? It comes from me. But desire originally is in accordance with Dharma. And of course, I'm the source of Dharma as well. And therefore, I'm the source of Dharma. And desire is originally the desire to follow Dharma, the desire to be good, the desire to be pure, the desire to be pious. And so that original desire, I'm that. So then you can twist that desire and infect that strength and materialize the world. But seen in its pure state, in its philosophical state, the whole world is connected to me at all times. Mata parataram anyat. Kinchit asti dhananjaya. Mayi sarvamidam protam. Sutre mani gana iva. Just like jewels on a thread. Just like jewels are strung together on a thread to make a necklace. Or pearls are strung together on a thread to make a necklace. Just like that, Mayi sarvamidam protam. The whole world is in me. It's strung on me. It's connected to me. Mata parataram nanyat. There is nothing greater than me. Kinchit, there's not anything which is greater than me. The whole world is strung on me, like pearls are strung on a thread. You see here Krishna engaging in theology. He's explaining how everything which exists in the world is connected to him. And that's not trouble-free. That's not problem-free. As soon as you go down that road, which is the road our tradition goes down, immediately people say, well, what about exploitation? What about suffering? What about evil? What about pain? What about the temporary nature of the world? What about things being lost and taken away from you in due course of time? Where does all that, does that all come from God? And then you have to explain it. And you have to do this philosophizing and this attempt, you have to make an attempt to put together a coherent world which can garner someone's faith and confidence. They feel like they live in a good world which is consistent with that all-good, all-powerful deity they live with. Evil, hell, is not consistent with an all-good, all-powerful God. These are serious problems, theologically speaking. They're insuperable problems. They don't go away. You cannot get around them. They're a death blow to a theology. It might seem like an easy way to just kind of throw everything in the bucket you don't want to deal with. René Descartes did this. He came up with a dualistic philosophy where he posited there was a phenomenal world, a world of matter, and a numinous world, a world of mind. And so consciousness and all that stuff was just in the numinous world. And then they could do science, and they could look at the material world. And when you would say, well, what about where does consciousness come from? Oh, that's numinous. We don't have to deal with that. Let's just deal with the material world in front of us. But the problem was, hundreds of years later, somebody goes, well, if this is a complete worldview, a world of matter, then all that mental stuff, and now we have the hard problem of consciousness, because you've got to figure out how consciousness is material. So sometimes you throw stuff into two buckets to get rid of the one that doesn't fit, but ultimately you have to go back and you have to figure that one out. And so if you throw all the bad stuff in the world in that evil bucket, that devil bucket, that mammon bucket, eventually you have to come back and deal with it. Sankhya had the same problem, which is a dualistic philosophy in ancient India. Christianity, Islam had this problem. Materialism has this problem. They ignored consciousness for centuries and just talked about matter and thought that their explanation was sufficient. But eventually philosophers caught up with them and said, what about consciousness? And that's a huge topic now within philosophy of mind, an attempt to explain how the mind comes from matter. And it's far from a resolved issue. So I think what Krishna does here is healthy. Rather than throwing everything that doesn't fit into a closet to be dealt with later, like if you clean your room and you just throw everything in your room in your closet and you shut the door and you're like, my room's clean now. It's not clean. You have a totally messy closet that you're going to have. You sweep everything into the closet. You sweep everything under the rug. But it's just a matter of time until all that stuff comes back to haunt you. And so what Krishna's doing here is quite elegant and beautiful. He's taking ownership of the material world, and he's trying to show you how you can see beauty and truth and the essence of things in a good way. And then, the adulteration of that thing is what we experience in the world, not the pure thing. And therefore, the solution to the material world is to start to view things as they actually are, instead of as we've made them to be. And you can start to see beauty in suffering, goodness in suffering, value in pain, truth in difficulty. And the material world ceases to be material. And it is connected to Krishna, and you see Krishna everywhere, in all things. And everything becomes an inspiration, even pain, even old age, even death, even material desires. Those things can be dissected through a philosophical microscope, and you can find divinity within everything, and you don't have to turn away from the world. You have to turn away from your exploitation of the world. And that's the real problem. And once you remove that desire to exploit, all of a sudden the material world is no longer filled with bad stuff. It's filled with unlimited opportunities for service. And you live in a beautiful, idyllic world. A Shangri-La, a heaven on earth. It was always that. You just took off the blinders, and now you can see what's always been, what truly is. Once you've removed your rebellion, your selfishness, your exploitation. And so when you look at the Hare Krishna lifestyle, our lifestyle is designed to remove the tendency to exploit from the equation, not to get rid of altogether the material world, not to deny the material world. That's why we have married priests instead of only sannyasis. We have a life-embracing, a world-embracing theology, which doesn't simply give up on the spiritual quest, but which seeks to find Krishna everywhere in all things, even in things which usually get swept under the carpet. We attack our selfishness. Even our selfishness. We attack it by saying that the real desire of the self is to love. It's deeper. It goes beyond your desire to enjoy. It's a desire to love and be of service. That's your core. And if you discover that, your desire to exploit will go away, because you've again embraced the real thing. And so we look at the world philosophically in a way where we're trying to see good in everything, in everyone, in every facet of the world. And we deconstruct the world. We deconstruct the world with a philosophical microscope that allows us to see the beauty in all things. We don't sweep anything under the carpet. We own all of it. because that's our theology. That's what Krishna does in the Gita. We have a monistic theology, a theology where we embrace that everything comes from a single source. That single source is Krishna. Therefore, we have to reconcile everything with Krishna. And it might be more trouble on the front end because you have to start to sort through everything that exists in the world. But on the back end, you've solved the problem. And when you cleaned your room, you've actually cleaned your room. You haven't just swept something under the carpet. Okay. IGTV, thank you guys very much. Is there anybody who wants to comment? We have a minute.